Greetings and welcome to Cybersecurity Today. I'm your host, Jim Wiggins. If this is your first time tuning into our program, allow me a few moments to introduce what we're all about. So what exactly is Cybersecurity Today? Well, it's a show designed to explore the realm of computer security in an exciting and thoughtful way. Cybersecurity Today is a half-hour news broadcast utilizing a talk show format to break down the themes, topics, and current events in the cybersecurity industry. Our mission with this program is to dispel the murkiness and complexity often associated with the cybersecurity sector. For our viewers who are already active professionals in the field, this show will deliver a pulse on the current state of affairs. We feature a variety of esteemed guests to delve into topics that are most important to those in the cybersecurity space. Our objective is to offer information to a diverse audience, from beginners to experts and everyone in between. You're sure to gain fresh insights from today's show. All right, so let's set the stage and discuss the structure of the show. This will help you understand what's in store. Today's show is divided into two parts. Our first segment, known as Cyber Bites, covers several current events unfolding today in the cybersecurity sector. Some of these stories might be familiar, while others may be entirely new to you. Then, in our second segment, we're joined by Mr. Brian Correia, the Director of Business Development at GIAC. He'll talk to us about the latest information found in the 2025 SANS GIAC Cybersecurity Workforce Research Report. Okay, so let's get into the Cyber Bites and talk about what's going on today in the cybersecurity industry. Cybersecurity researchers uncovered a massive data breach exposing approximately 16 billion login credentials for users of major platforms such as Google, Microsoft, Facebook, and Apple. This breach is described as the largest in history and is believed to involve data stolen by malware known as infostealers. Though no centralized breach occurred at major tech companies, the leaked credentials included login URLs for their services. In other news, Aflac, one of the largest U.S. insurance companies, experienced a significant cyber attack compromising customer data, including social security numbers, insurance claims, and health information. The breach, identified on June 12th and halted within hours, did not involve ransomware and left Aflac fully operational. The intrusion resulted from a sophisticated social engineering campaign attributed to the hacker group Scattered Spider. In other news, AT&T suffered a significant data breach, with hackers reportedly accessing and leaking the personal information of more than 86 million customers. The compromised data includes full names, dates of birth, phone numbers, email addresses, and physical addresses, with over 44 million social security numbers involved. The leak presents substantial risks to customer privacy and makes individuals vulnerable to identity theft and fraud. Those are some of the top headlines shaping the cybersecurity landscape. We'll take a quick break, but when we return, Mr. Brian Correia will join us to talk about the new research identified in the 2025 SANS GIAC Cybersecurity Workforce Research Report.
Trying to straighten your teeth yourself can cause serious damage and tooth loss. Moving teeth is a healthcare procedure that needs the supervision of an orthodontist. These are experts in moving teeth and aligning jaws. For more, visit mylifemysmile.org.
Welcome back to Cybersecurity Today. Now, in this next segment, we're pleased to welcome Mr. Brian Correia, the Director of Business Development at GIAC and a longtime leader in the cybersecurity certification and training space. With decades of experience at organizations like SANS GIAC and ISC2, Brian has played a pivotal role in shaping how cybersecurity certifications and workforce development initiatives are used across the private and public sectors. Brian brings a wealth of insights on the intersection of security operations, professional development, and certification strategy. Today, he joins us to discuss the evolving demands on cybersecurity teams, the challenges of aligning skills to industry frameworks, and what it takes to build a capable and resilient workforce in today's threat landscape. Specifically, we'll discuss themes and topics in the recently released 2025 SANS GIAC Cybersecurity Workforce Research Report. Brian, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me back.
So I think this is number 4. I think
Yeah.
we've decided,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
I'm working on number 5.
Yeah. So we know what's going to happen when we get to number 5, right? Little inside joke for the viewers. So he's expecting the SNL 5-time jacket, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Then we invite back all the other 5-timers, right?
Oh, yeah.
Which may be only me, but
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. All right, so, Brian, I thought maybe what we could do is start, could you just provide a quick overview of what the report is? And we're going to have some viewers, that we had you in last year, and we talked about the 2024, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the differences, but maybe just provide a quick overview of what the 2025 report is.
So this report was built solely about the workforce. It was built for people that do the hire and retainment of the workforce. So it was built for what I would consider 2 audiences, and I kind of lump them together as cyber talent managers. So it could be security team leads, but it could also be HR managers. And the idea was to give them a resource of what the community is looking at, what they're hiring, what they're doing to retain folks, what trends are happening out there, and just kind of delve in there because I would say maybe this report was started with the idea that everybody talks about the headcount gap problem in cybersecurity, but nobody talks about what sits in that headcount. And so I really wanted to focus, because I think there's some myths that are out there. And so we wanted to kind of like debunk those a little bit, but also kind of just like lift the curtain up a little bit.
Understood. So, maybe we could start off with, that's a great overview, so appreciate that. Can you talk a little bit about some of the major themes or revelations that stood out in the report this year?
Yeah. So it was interesting because last year's report was just US only, and we did that because we kind of wanted to get our feet wet a little bit, and this year we went international. And there was some trends that happened differently, and it was interesting because we did actually stripped out the international and just looked at the US to see if those trends were still happening, and they were. So I actually have to admit there was a couple surprises. In one year, I was surprised to see so many changes. And maybe it's just because cybersecurity in general, that this industry is just a moving target. So maybe some of the big things were, so one was, hey, it's always been, we don't have enough people in cybersecurity, we don't have enough people. This year's report, actually the skills gap was considered a bigger problem. So in other words, it's not that we don't have enough people, we don't have enough people with the right skills. So that was a big one. One was, there's always talk in our industry about work experience. You have to have work experience, and it still popped up as something that was very important. But technical capability, in other words, can you get that person to the role that you need to get them at, actually became very strong, number 1. We noticed that there was definitely HR and security team leads. While they do think differently, they're starting to think more and more alike. So there was some interesting things. I mean, I can keep on going, but I would say those were probably the big things that, I'll be quite frank, I thought it would take 5, 10, 15, maybe never for those changes to happen. So it was surprising to see. And what will be interesting to see is those trends as the years go on. Does it go backwards? Does it go forwards?
Sure.
What do people look at? So, but I mean, I would say maybe if there was one theme, is you're starting to see this industry came out of nowhere, right? I think we can all agree to that. And you're starting to see the standardization of the workforce and the standardization of just cybersecurity in general. So, but it's been surprising to see how quick that's happening.
Sure. So, great information there on the themes that are prevalent in the report. Were there any specific sectors or any specific regions that you identified as more critical than others?
I would say the report was still very U.S. focused, but Europe was, if there was anybody that came in that report. And so Europe is always kind of an interesting territory, especially because there's been a lot of stuff about critical infrastructure, cyber incidents. So one thing you always hear about Europe is, hey, we're closer to some of the problems that are going on in the world. Like they'll bring up Ukraine. Hey, in the US, you have a whole pond that separates you. Here in Europe, we don't have anything, right? And so you hear of topics over in Europe that you don't necessarily, that are considered a bigger deal over there than they are here.
Got it.
And that showed in the results of the report too. and some of the ways that they think. So maybe a perfect example is in Europe, there's a couple new directives that I think are very huge in the industry. So there's one called NIS2, which is for any organization that's a critical infrastructure, they now have to put together a report that goes to what's called ENISA, which is the European Security Agency. They also have to report cyber incidents, things along those lines. There's another big one called DORA. DORA is for the financial industry, but the same way. So directives, for example, was like, are they affecting your hiring? Was as strong as 50% in Europe. It was 40% total. But I'll be quite frank, I expected that number, like NIS2 just went live in October, DORA went live in January. So we're talking like these things are still very, very brand new. And NIS2 has to be signed off by, there's 27 nations in Europe that fall under the EU. Right now, there's only maybe like 10 that have signed on for that. DORA, because it's a financial industry, actually already covers all 27. But, this stuff is still very, very, very brand new. To see that it's already affecting things that much, I'll be quite frank, I expected that number to be like 5-10%. I never expected it to be 40-50.
Understood. So does the report get into like what roles are like hot right now, or are like from a demand perspective? If someone were watching the show and wanted to basically know, well, where should I go? Which areas are hot button areas?
Yeah, so what we did was we picked 5 roles that are considered pretty hot right now. And the idea was to kind of give a little bit of a variance. But in those 5 roles, we were looking like, what are people looking for when they're hiring? Questions of like, what kind of background are they? To help people out to better understand. But also the people that are hiring saying, what are their colleagues looking for? So for example, we did risk manager, which is kind of a new hot. We did OT.
Which stands for?
Operational technology.
Okay.
So kind of think of that as like ICS, utilities. We did that as a security engineer. We did a pen tester, because that's always a very popular one. And so we try to pick some roles, but we try to make them kind of different than the others. We did a system admin, because it's a very broad SOC analyst. We did that, and then we did a forensics analyst. So the idea is they're kind of a little bit of the yin and the yang of each other. Got
it. So, technology continues to evolve, and you kind of alluded to some of the regulatory issues going on. Are we seeing any particular type of new responsibilities start to emerge as a result of technology? Maybe an example could be like artificial intelligence.
Yeah. So, it's interesting because AI is like the hot topic. And there's always the argument of like, is AI going to take over the workforce? Is it going to change everything? And we all have different opinions on it. Over here, what we saw from the report is it's a tool. It's a tool to make us do our jobs better. Now, the downside is everybody has those same tools. So the threats have also increased, but the way to protect yourself has also increased. So, but the idea is like, sometimes I go back to, as crazy as it sounds, like when PCs were invented, or Microsoft Office, or even farming, right? Jobs didn't disappear because of that. They evolved and they changed. So, but you could definitely see that AI is having some influence, but what I think it is doing is it's making everything go faster, right? You're becoming much more efficient. You're becoming, the technology, but it's got good and bad with it too. I mean, one thing that I always try to emphasize, like I'm doing a presentation for HR managers here next week, is like, for example, you don't want to put confidential information into AI. And the big thing I always try to emphasize is AI is still only so good. A human at the end of the day does need to check the work.
Sure.
But there's definitely some things like we've started creating like policies around AI for organizations and, kind of putting a little bit of some guardrails. But, you always want to make sure that at the end of the day, like you don't want to put employees' records, for example, in an AI system.
Sure.
And you also want to be careful of, like, for example, people's evaluations of their jobs and performance and stuff like that have started going into AI. But at the end of the day, you do need a human to check all that work.
Sure. Okay, so another aspect I was curious about relative to the report with HR is certifications versus degree. This has been an age-old kind of tug of war between the two. What did the report say about that?
It's interesting. It definitely showed that certifications have been kind of sticking out a little bit more, and I'd love to tell you that was something we did. That was what the feedback came. But it's interesting. Every role is a little bit different, right? Like we did notice, and who the audience was. So for example, for HR managers, degrees were considered hugely important, more than certifications. But if you asked a security team lead, it was the complete flip-flop, right? They said certifications are much more important, and they had moved degrees down a little bit. But one thing I think that was important that came out of the report is there's no one silver bullet, right? You want to, when you have people in the program, like, one of the things where, over 50% of these organizations said that they have formalized training programs even within their own organization on cybersecurity. So while they were using outside training, they were still using some internal training. But it's always interesting. We're over here at SANS, we are also an academia institution, and we're a certification body. So we kind of have our hands in
both areas. Yeah, 100%.
Which is kind of unique for a lot of, we're pretty unique in that, because usually you're one or the other.
So what did the report talk about relative to skill validation? It seems like there's a big emphasis today on upskilling or trying to build out skills. Did the report get into that particular aspect of it?
It did, and it was interesting because that was one of the things I think that was a little bit of a surprise of how. So one of the questions was, do you need skills validation for external purposes? And then it asked the question for internal purposes. If you'd asked me, if I was a betting man, I would say, that number would have been much higher for internal purposes than external purposes. The actual feedback came back the complete opposite. The external validation was considered, and so the way we defined it, and where I maybe kick myself, where I'd like to ask this question a little bit better next year, was we listed it as, do you need it for audits? Do you need it for cyber insurance? And do you need it to win business? So the one area where I maybe kick myself is we didn't ask those three categories. We just lumped them all three together. But it was a 65%, which was, once again, and then the internal one was significantly lower. So people are saying it's very important for external purposes, not for so much for internal purposes.
Interesting.
But some ways, when we talk about the industry standardizing, you could make that argument of that's similar to an accounting profession or a medical or a lawyer. Sometimes I think accounting's kind of a good one to work with because it has, but the whole idea of, hiring CPAs and tax advisors and investment brokers, things along those lines, like you're starting to see some of that come over into this industry. And as you well know, there's a little bit of controversy because it does affect the ceiling. And I think that's something that's very, very important that we have to be very careful on of, this industry needs as many good people as it can. So are we building a ceiling that's preventing people from entering this industry?
So let's talk about that. I know that in prior administrations, before the current Trump administration, there was a heavy focus on DEI.
Yep.
And now DEI is kind of taken, has been started to get reduced in terms of focus and efforts. Did the report at all talk about aspects of diversity or what HR managers are looking for? Is that still a focal point relative to the commercial sector, or what did the report talk about in that respect?
So it was a little bit interesting, and I almost hate to say this. The report actually, anybody that could fill out the report, so we had about 3,500, so we had a really good sample this year. It actually closed the week that the new administration was coming into play. So in some ways, I'd love to see how those numbers change from last year to this year. So in some ways, some of the numbers we didn't utilize, but we definitely saw I think one thing that was very interesting is what I would call the non-traditional candidate, but also in turn, we saw a big shift of, in the past of cybersecurity, I needed to hire what I would always call the LeBron. I needed the LeBron that fit exactly to the job description. In 1 year, I was surprised to see there was such a shift where they said, look, I'm looking to hire someone that meets 70, 80% of that job rec, because I'm never going to find someone that meets 100%. And how do I get them to the level of 100% or 90 to 100%? So you are seeing that shift in the environment. But we did have a series of case studies. One of my favorites was we had a case study about academies. So we did WCCS, which is for Women in Cybersecurity, and then Rogers University, which is out of Canada. Because remember, this is an international. And Rogers is very big on bringing in non-traditional candidates. And it talked very much on those two of like what they're doing to get those people jobs, but also how are they building them into cybersecurity? Because sometimes I think the biggest problem with cybersecurity is, I think we two are perfect examples. We had no path to get into cybersecurity, and pretty much anybody that I know that's been in this industry for, I would say, 10 years plus, never had a traditional path.
Sure.
And even today, there's not a lot of traditional paths. One thing that was very fascinating was a lot of people talked about pulling people from organizations, from other divisions that were stars, and bringing them over to cybersecurity with the idea of, hey, we need really, really good people. That person may be sitting in accounting and maybe sitting somewhere else. Now, it didn't talk about it in the research report, but like, for example, we did a study one time of who made the best pen testers. As funny as it sounds, high school teachers were actually off the charts, but there's a perfect example. Everybody thinks it's going to be the teenage kid sitting in a hoodie, hanging out in Paris or somewhere really cool. And here it was saying high school teachers.
Interesting.
Because the idea is they think outside the box. So, I guess you think about it, a high school teacher shows up and they may never know what's going to happen with the kids that day, how they're going to teach, things along those lines. Well, they could think very well in that front. But it's interesting to see some great organizations like WCCS and Rogers and what they're doing to try to build up that pipeline of folks that may not have ever entered otherwise.
Understood. Talk to me about the report in terms of job satisfaction. What were the prevailing themes about? Is it money? Is it purpose? Is it upward mobility? What were the things that people were saying were most important?
So you have to remember, this was managers, not the employees themselves. So managers were saying like, okay, what are the type of things that are incentives that we want to keep people to retain, but also to recruit folks? And no surprise, salary was their number one concern of, hey, I lose people because they don't have the right salary and things along those lines. But what was interesting was seeing some of the numbers past salary and very, very close. So one of them was just not having people with the right skills. Some of the areas that people talked about was building career paths, which this industry hasn't really done well. And the report, I think, especially in the case studies, talks about building career paths for people, especially to retain them, and knowing that there is a place for them to go, right? Of they're not going to just be in this one job for forever, and talking about stuff along those lines. One thing that did surprise me a little bit, and it's kind of dug a little bit deep in the report, but I guess I was a little bit surprised. And the reason I say this, because once again, this is managers, not employees, was a little bit about the toxic culture, which I thought was kind of an interesting to know that managers are talking about it, not because what that says is managers are talking about what are employees really saying.
Sure.
So that was something I think that was, but you saw things from, I always use the example of a SOC analyst. So one of the complaints of SOC analysts is they don't have any say on the tools that they can utilize. And people walk out of organizations all the time because nobody wants to do a job that they can't do well because they don't have the proper tools. So their argument is somebody else is making those decisions for them of what tools they can use, and they have no say. And so they're walking out the door, and some of the research report talks about all that type of stuff, and you could see it in some of the numbers, in some of the categories where that was something I think that's really, really important, is allowing people to be successful, right?
Yeah.
One of the big things, this came up from EY, was they allow their employees sometimes to work 4 days a week. And their reasoning is because cybersecurity is not a 9-to-5 job. And so those people may have to work crazy hours. And so giving them a chance to make that up with their families and stuff like that by allowing that to happen. So there was definitely some, this industry did require some flexibility. It wasn't a traditional job, and you had to look at it that way.
Understood. So, Brian, we are out of time.
Okay.
So we're going to go ahead and provide guidance for the audience on how they can get it. You've given us an image. It'll be a QR code that'll be in the bottom of it. Any final thoughts before we close out?
Yeah, no, I appreciate everybody's thoughts. When you look at I would love to, if you have any feedback of what you'd like to see here in the future. I mean, we're always, our goal is, we've done it twice now, so we're always still learning. We've been blessed to have, we had some case studies from this year. We had from Cisco to EY to United Airlines. We also had some international, so Airbus, for example, did one this year. And so we've been the Middle East Broadcasting Corporation. But the idea with those case studies was to add stories and scenarios to what that is. But I'd love to have, any feedback anybody has for future years, what they'd like to see. I mean, our goal is to really provide a great resource for the community.
Understood. Well, Brian, we're out of time. Thanks for coming in.
Hey, thank you.
So that's going to do it for today's episode of Cybersecurity Today. We again want to thank Mr. Brian Correia for coming in and sharing his information. If you'd like to learn more about the program and maybe future episodes, please visit our show's website at www.cybersecurity.org. Additionally, you can scan the QR code that's now displayed at the bottom of your screen for quick and easy access to the show's website. Finally, we welcome your questions or comments via email at contact@cybersecuritytoday.org. Feel free to reach out to us. That does it for today. Thanks a lot for joining us. We look forward to seeing you at our next broadcast. Stay safe, stay informed. Have a great day.